Hey guys, how is it going? Hey guys, I'm so glad that you guys joined me for this episode of the Film Life vlog. So I'm at church and just a church buddy just called me aside and he said, "Hey Ben, I know you're into film. I know you like film and I wanted to give you a gift." So I was like, absolutely, I love gifts, especially when it comes to film gear. And guess what he gave me? He just handed this beautiful little device to me. And some of you are probably wondering, what is this? What is this? When I first got it, I was like, oh man, what is this? I saw the lens and then I saw the scale on the top and I knew exactly what this was. I knew, well not exactly, but I knew that this was some form of a light meter. And he is like, I've had this, but I thought that I would give it to you as a gift. So I saw this, I was like, okay, thank you. I was so appreciative of it because I just love not receiving gifts per se, but I just love gadgets. And the moment I saw this, I took a look at the meter. I knew it was a light meter of some sort and it's a Pentax brand. And I just kept looking at the meter, and every time I pointed it to something, I noticed that the meter would be this indicator here would be changing. So I was like, okay, it's probably working. If you look carefully here, you would see that there are two levels here. And for those of you that are familiar with how light meters work, this is for high. When it's really bright, you use this, and low, when it's in normal conditions, you use it. You indicate here. And the mid position, I could tell that was for the off position. And over here, just looking up here, I could tell that there were two types of markings here. And just looking at it, I knew that this would be the aperture setting. And if you could tell, there are two divisions. One of them, part of it is black and part of it is red. So indicating that the red part is what you use to read when your indicator here is for the low setting here. And when you put it at the high setting, you basically read with these black markings here. And I also could tell that this was the shutter speed, because if you take a close look, you will notice that it starts from the bulb setting B, and this would be 1 second, half a second, a quarter, and so on and so forth to 1/1000th of a second. But I was a bit disappointed actually. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of how this actually works. So I was a bit troubled by it. And then I came home, I decided to do some research about this, and guess what I found? I found that this particular light meter was actually made for my Pentax. Remember this camera here? Remember this camera that I shared with you guys a few weeks ago? I'm actually going to put a link of that video right up there so you can click on it and add it to your playlist. But this camera, which I shared with you, which I picked up a few weeks ago, this light meter was actually designed for this particular camera, and this is the Asahi Pentax. This version is the S1, and you can see it right there. And apparently there's another version called the S3, and as I was reading, I found out that this light meter was made for not just the S1 but also the S3, and I was like, yay, this is exciting. Because guess what? As awesome as this camera is, this camera does not have a light meter built in. So when I got this, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope this thing works. I hope this thing works. And so I proceeded to try it on. So this is designed to actually fit perfectly on top. And I'll show you how this works. But before I show you how it works, I'm actually going to let you know that this actually comes with a battery right in there. And apparently this battery is supposed to be 1.3 volts, and it was the original battery was made with mercury, and that battery no longer exists. You could use an alkaline battery, those button batteries, to replace it, and those ones are usually 1.5 volts. But if you some forum, I learned from a forum that if you want to use the 1.5 volts, you're going to have to adjust this. You see these little things here? This is actually the ISO setting. So take a look. When you're using the 1.5 volt battery, it sort of throws your light readings off by 2 stops. So it actually would over exaggerate your light reading by 2 stops. So therefore, for example, if I am using an ISO, if I load my camera with an ISO of 200, which you see right here, let me make sure I'm pointing to the right thing, right there. I will have to adjust it, this to fit two stops below 200, and that would come to 100 and then 50. So I would set this at ISO 50. Okay, and the way you set it is there's a little dot that you see right there, and you would just adjust this to fit. And the way you do is just twist this a little bit to put it on ISO 50, as you can see right there. Okay, so I'm going to, if I load my camera with 200 film, I have to adjust this 2 stops back to reflect the change in the sensitivity of the light meter because of the voltage difference that of the battery that I have put in here. So I'm going to show you how this fits on the camera. It's really cool. So as I mentioned, this is designed here to fit right on top. If you notice, there's a little groove here on the shutter speed dial right there. Right, there's a little groove that this pin actually fits into. So you have to make sure that they're aligned properly. And the beautiful thing is that because this is practically going to replace your shutter speed dial, it's also facing it's on the top, so you can see it basically just as you would be able to see this, right? It's right on top. And then this ISO setting is on the side here, so you will still be able to make the necessary adjustments and be able to judge from it that way. So before I put this on, I will first align this hole on the shutter speed dial. I will probably move it to a specific position right there. And now I'm going to also move this to a similar position right there. Okay, and if you notice, there are these grooves located right on top of your viewfinder right there. Okay, right on top here. Okay, and that is to allow these protrusions to just slip right into it. Okay, so what I do is I just fix it on top like that. Okay, and then I just slip it. It falls in quite easily. And while I put it on, I make sure, because I can see through. Okay, you can see that's the pin right there, and I'm just gonna make sure that it sits, and it just fell right in place. It fell right in place, and that is just beautiful. Look at that. So there's no gap there now, and this is also sitting right in those grooves. And look, this flap here just covers the eyepiece, the viewfinder portion like that, and it just secures it in place. So this is how this is supposed to fit on. And now if I wanted to change the ISO on the light meter, I can actually see it on the side here. So now that this is fit on, look at that. That's the lens that will allow the light to go through the light meter. And just look at how it transforms this camera. It actually makes it look really cool, I say. Look at that. It's just a beautiful little contraption. I have taken this for a little spin and it actually is quite beautiful. It works very well. So now I'm going to show you how this thing actually works, okay? So take a look. Okay, what do you see here? You see some scales. You see the aperture settings here, and over here on top here you would see the shutter speed settings. Once you've put this light meter on the camera, you have to take note of obviously your ISO. Here I have set the ISO to 400. So I'm going to change the ISO to 200, which is what we're just pretending that that's the film that we've put in there. So now it's set to 200, and remember that we have modified this to reflect an ISO of 50 because we've compensated for that voltage difference, right? Remember that. So I'm gonna demonstrate how this works. Okay, so right now I have my blinds over there closed, at least partially, and in this particular condition you will notice that there's not a lot of light coming in here. The incident light is moderate, I would say. And if you notice, the dial here is not really moving, and that's because it's currently set in the high setting. In a very bright condition you would use the high setting here. In a not so bright condition as you have indoors, or what I have currently here, I will be using the low setting here. Okay, so I'm going to change this to the low setting. The moment I do that, now you notice that this actually switched. I'll do it again. High, see, and then now low. So now I'm actually getting a reading that I could actually use. If I use the high, you notice that it's at that position here, which is the off position, and that means it's not the ideal setting to use. This little mark here is actually the off position. That's the 0 mark. I do not want it to be over there. So what I do is I switch it to the low setting, and now I can actually use the red part here. Now remember that this corresponds to the red markings on the dial here. In order to the way this works is that it's not like your typical light meter where it gives you a reading and then it will also give you a combination of shutter speed versus aperture reading. Okay, it does it in a similar way. However, the way this one would work is that this dial stays fixed, and this is all based on the amount of light that's coming through here. And the current aperture on this lens is f2.2. So at the very minimum, I cannot go past the 2 here. I want to make sure, because right now if you look here, this little thing here is actually f1.4. I cannot use that setting because this lens only goes down to f2.2. So at the very least I want to be at f2 here. So what I do is I move this dial, and as you move this dial, you bring it in alignment with the meter reading here, and you see that the meter reading falls in line with this white part which travels down, and this is f2. So what this is telling me is that the fastest shutter speed that I can use at this particular exposure is 1/130th of a second. Okay, so this is how this works. If I were to use a different setting, for example, if I wanted to prioritize the aperture and I wanted to use f4, then over here, this means that at that f4 which I am prioritizing, the fastest shutter speed, or the appropriate shutter speed setting that I should use is 1/1/8 of a second. And that's how this works. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to now open the blinds, and I'm going to let in more light, and then I'm going to demonstrate how this would work with the high setting. And just like that, as you can see, I've opened the blinds, I'm letting in a lot more light. And just take a look here. If you take a look now, you notice that the meter is all the way down to the corner here, and that would tell you that, hey, this is not the appropriate setting to use. You can't be using the low setting here. So I'm going to switch this to the high setting, and the moment I do that, now it moves to a point where I can actually meter it properly. And at this current, and remember, because you're using the high, you only can read from the black portion of the dial here, which means I have to go from this side, this direction, okay? Now, what this is telling me is that with this amount of light that's coming into the camera, it's telling me that at this shutter speed, for example, at 1/1/60th of a second, my appropriate aperture setting should be at, read it down, f5.6 at this amount of light. If I wanted to say prioritize the shutter speed, and if I wanted to go even higher, maybe to f500, then it will tell me that, hey, I'm gonna have to actually bring down my aperture to f2.8, and my lens can still handle that because my lens goes up to f2.2. I want to actually see how much more shutter speed I can squeeze through this, and now that I'm doing that, look where it's telling me. Look what it's telling me now. It's telling me I will have to go down to f1.4, and my lens cannot handle f1.4, so that means that my image will actually be underexposed. Okay, so what I'll do is bring it back down to an aperture setting that this camera can actually handle. So if I wanted to prioritize, let's say, the aperture, let's say I really want to reduce the depth of field. I don't want to blow out the background. I want my composition, everything in the composition, most things to be in focus. So that means that you want the higher aperture numbers here, which means you are going to actually close your aperture to be smaller, right? So if I wanted that, then I would actually prioritize. Let's say I want f22 right here. So I'm gonna go to f22, and at that aperture setting, what it's telling me is that, hey, your shutter speed is going to have to be around, let's say, 1/115th of a second to get the right exposure, right? If I wanted f8, I would just change the dial to where the meter is, f8, and my shutter speed will have to be 1/130th of a second. So in a nutshell, this is how this meter works. I was worried that it wouldn't work, but actually it works, and it actually works quite nicely. Now, to make this work well, just a few tips. Just make sure that when you're turning, you make sure you press this down a bit. Because of the age of these devices, oftentimes there's a little sway. There's a little sway in this, and you may be actually turning the dial, and it will not be actually changing the dial because this pin may actually come out. So that's something to be mindful of. The other tip is always check your ISO setting as you would, and also make the necessary adjustments for the ISO on the dial here. Basically, you reduce it by 2 stops if you're using a 1.5 volt battery. Hey guys, so I just want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you found this video useful, please do click the like button, and if you have not already subscribed, please do click the subscribe button. And as always guys, I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and stay safe.